the story of Amoke, the woman who carried home in her heart. Gather around, my children, and listen with your hearts as much as with your ears. Tonight, I will tell you the story of Amoke, a woman whose footsteps wandered far from her homeland, yet whose soul never left the red earth of Benin. Her journey will teach you that even when your hands touch gold, if your heart has no home, your joy will have no roots. Amoke was born in Uromi, where the morning drums spoke before the sun rose, and the laughter of children filled the dusty courtyards. Her mother was a weaver, her father a teacher of proverbs, and from them she learned early that a person is a person because of other people. In her village, no one ate alone, even a stranger's shadow was welcome to the fire. But the wind of destiny does not always blow softly. When Amike was 20, a letter arrived like a bird from afar. She had been chosen to study overseas. Her family danced, the drums of Uromi sounded in her honor, and her mother tied a red cloth around her wrist for protection. Yet, as her mother hugged her goodbye, she whispered, "Do not let the ways of strangers bury the ways of your people." The land she traveled to was cold, not only in weather, but in spirit. The sun rose without warmth, and people walked swiftly, eyes fixed on invisible paths. No one greeted her on the streets. Even her neighbors' doors were like sealed calabashes. In that new world, Amoke learned that silence could be louder than drums. At first, she was strong. She studied hard, worked harder, and smiled when she could. But as the years went by, loneliness began to carve small wounds in her heart. You see, my children, the tree that grows alone fears the wind. Amoke had no one to share her laughter, no one to taste her soup, no one to ask if she was well. She tried to build community. She invited people to her small apartment. She cooked egusi soup, jollof rice, and sweet puff puff. They came, they ate, they smiled. But when the plates were empty, so were their hearts. There was no warmth of kinship, only politeness as thin as paper. She realized that many people will sit at your table, but not all will stand with you in the storm. Then came betrayal, the kind that leaves a scar no medicine can heal. A friend she trusted with her secrets mocked her behind her back. Another one took her idea and presented it as his own. And a man she once loved turned her gentleness into a game. Amoke wept, not because they hurt her, but because she had opened her heart to them. From that day, she built walls around her soul, higher than the city buildings. The seasons turned. 10 years passed like a river flowing without a pause. Amoke had achieved what many dreamed of. She had a fine education, a good job, and a house that glowed with light. But inside, she felt like a calabash filled with emptiness. She had the people around her, yes, but none who truly saw her, none who understood her laughter or the way her voice rose like a song when she spoke of home. One night, as she sat by her window, watching the snow fall like a silent ash, she heard the faint echo of a song her mother used to hum. It was a song about belonging, about truths that remember, even when the tree grows far away. Amoke pressed her hand to her heart and whispered, "I must go home." When she arrived in Uromi, after so many years, the air greeted her like an old friend. The smell of roasted corn, the chatter of market women, the laughter of children chasing goats. Everything felt alive. Her mother's eyes glistened with tears. Her father's voice trembled with joy. But something else trembled in Amoke's chest, a strange mix of comfort and sorrow. She walked through the village streets, now older, wiser, and weary. The children bowed, calling her Auntie Amoke from abroad. Yet she felt both near and far, like a drumbeat heard through a wall. Her people had changed, and so had she. She spoke with the tongue of two worlds, one of home, one of exile. At the evening fire, she sat among the elders. The moon shone bright, and they shared tales of those who had traveled and returned. One elder said, "A bird that forgets his nest will never rest." Another added, "Home is not where your body lives, it is where your soul is known." Amoke nodded quietly. She realized that she had carried her home in her heart all along, but she had also kept it locked away. She began to share her stories of her cold lands, of her betrayals, of her long nights spent studying under the hum of machines. The young ones listened with wide eyes, and as she spoke, she felt the warmth of community return. For the first time in years, someone truly listened, not for what they could take, but for what they could learn. But even as joy bloomed, she knew something had been lost. The years abroad had changed her rhythm. The easy laughter, the playful teasing of her youth, they now felt like clothes that no longer fit. She belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. A traveler. Her father said, "It's like the wind, known by many, owned by none." Still, Amoke poured herself into the life of the village. She taught the children to read, helped the women build a small market, and shared what she'd learned overseas. Slowly, she saw new seeds sprouting: confidence, knowledge, and unity. She realized that even when one feels lost, they can still be a light for others. One day, a young girl asked her, "Auntie Amoke, why did you come back if life was so good there?" Amoke smiled sadly and said, "Because no matter how far the river flows, it never forgets its source. I had wealth, but I lacked warmth. I had company, but I lacked community." The girl nodded, though she did not yet understand. As the seasons passed, Amoke grew content in her bittersweet peace. She had learned that happiness is not the same as fullness. You can have joy and still long for home. You can be surrounded by people and still feel alone. But when you live true to who you are, your heart finds its rhythm again. Before she left again, for she would soon return to her work overseas, the elders held a small feast in her honor. They sang songs of wisdom and said, "Amoke, you remind us that home is not a place one escapes, but a place one carries." She wept, not from sadness, but from a weight of understanding. As she boarded her flight back to the foreign land, she whispered a prayer to the ancestors. "Let me never forget the sound of the drums, the laughter of my people, the warmth of shared hearts." She knew now that community was not just the people around you, but the love you keep alive within you. The courage to trust again, to give again, even when the world has grown cold. Part 4. And so, my children, when you walk the paths of life, remember Amoke's story. A single hand cannot tie a bundle. A house filled with strangers is emptier than a hut filled with love. Success without belonging is a tree without roots. No matter where your journey takes you, never forget the warmth of your people, for only among them will your spirit truly rest. When Amoke returned to the cold land after her visit home, something within her had changed. She walked with a new calm, the calm of a woman who had seen both the emptiness of solitude and the power of togetherness. In her heart, she carried the red soil of Uromi and the voices of her elders. When people looked into her eyes, they saw both distance and depth. as though she had touched something eternal. Her colleagues noticed it too. They said, "You seem lighter, Amoke. What happened back home?" She would smile gently and say, "I remembered who I am." For she had realized that forgetting one's people is like a tree forgetting its roots. It may stand tall for a while, but the wind will find it. She walked with renewed purpose, no longer for pride or praise, but to build bridges between worlds. Amoke began organizing gatherings where Africans in the diaspora met to share stories, cook their traditional foods, and speak their languages freely without shame. "Let us not just survive here," she would say. "Let us live here as Africans, not as shadows of others." Soon, the room that once echoed with loneliness began to echo with laughter, drums, and the scent of home. But even in our joy, Amoke felt the ache of those who still wandered without belonging. She saw young people losing their way, chasing acceptance in foreign lands, while forgetting the wisdom of their ancestors. She became like a mother to them, teaching them proverbs, cooking for them on Sundays, and telling stories just as I tell you now. Power 5. Sometimes late at night, when the city slept, she would sit by her window and whisper to the stars, "Mother, I did not let the ways of strangers bury the ways of our people." In the silence that followed, she would imagine her mother smiling across the seas, and the moon, that same moon that shone over Oromi, would rest its light gently on her face, as if blessing her for keeping the fire alive. Years passed again. Amoke grew older, but her spirit only deepened. People began to call her Mama Amoke, the wise woman who knew the language of two worlds. Whenever she spoke, her words carried weight. "Do not mistake company for community," she would say. "One fills the room, the other fills the heart." One day, a young woman named Iseohe came to her door crying. She too had left Benin to study abroad, but was drowning in loneliness and betrayal. Amoke took her hand and said softly, "I know that pain, but do not let hurt make you hard. Remember, the palm tree bends with the storm. It does not break." From that day, Aseohe became like a daughter to Amoke. Together, they built a small community of African women in the diaspora. They shared meals, taught each other songs, and held circles of healing. Through them, Amoke's wisdom flowed like water from an old well, refreshing, restoring, and reminding everyone that we rise stronger when we rise together. But time, my children, has its own journey. One winter morning, as the first snow fell, Amoke sat by her window, gazing at the horizon. She felt her spirit grow still, the stillness of peace. She closed her eyes, and in her dreams, she walked barefoot on the red earth of Benin once more. Her mother's voice called her name. The drums played softly, and the breeze carried the scent of home. Amoke smiled, whispered a prayer of gratitude, and drifted away like the evening smoke. When word reached Uromi that Amoke had joined the ancestors, the people mourned, but they also danced, for she had lived a life of purpose. Her name became a proverb. Remember Amoke, the one who carried home wherever she went. Each year, during the festival of New Yam, the elders told her story to the young ones so they would never forget. Success means little if your heart forgets where it belongs. In her hometown, her father planted a tree beside the family compound, a tall, strong iroko with roots that reach deep and branches that reached high. He said, "Let this tree remind us that our children may travel far, but they must never lose the soil that made them." Over time, Travelers would come from afar to sit beneath that iroko and tell their own stories of journey and belonging. Back in the city, overseas, Esiohe and the women Amoke mentored continued her work. They named their community group the House of Amoke. It became a place where no one felt unseen, where laughter, food, stories, and healing flowed freely. On the wall, they painted one of her favorite sayings: to be known is to be home. Young Africans from all walks of life began to gather there: students, workers, artists, each seeking something they could not find elsewhere. And in that space, they rediscovered themselves, their roots, and each other. They realized that being far from home did not mean being far from belonging. They only needed to remember that love is also a home. Sometimes when the wind passed or through the room during their gatherings, it felt like Amoke's presence, gentle, warm, watching. They would smile knowingly, saying, Mama Amoke is here. Her legacy had become more than memory. It had become movement. And so her story rippled like a stone dropped into still water, spreading from one soul to another. Each person who heard it learned something new. That community is not built with the stones or walls, but with trust, compassion, and shared humanity. Even in a foreign land, one can light a fire that warms many hearts. Yeah, years later, when Esiwe returned to Benin with her own children, she took them to see the Irko tree. She knelt by its roots and said, "This is the story of Ameke, the woman who proved that no matter how far you travel, home travels with you." The children listened, wide-eyed, as the wind rustled through the leaves, as though whispering, "Remember." Esohe's daughter asked, "Mama, did Amoke ever find what she was missing?" Her mother smiled and said, "Yes, my child. She found it in all of us. In every person she touched, every soul she reminded of home." The little girl nodded slowly, and the story took root on her heart like a seed waiting for its season. And so, Amoke's life became a living proverb, a mirror for every wanderer and every dreamer. The heart that remembers its people will never truly be lost. The story was told in homes, schools, and firesides, teaching generations that success without community is a basket without a base. It cannot hold joy. Even now, when the moon rises over Uromi and the elders sit to tell tales, you can still hear her name spoken with reverence. Children lean forward, young people nod thoughtfully, and the old ones smile knowingly. For Amoke's journey belongs to us all, those who live, those who return, and those who keep the fire of belonging alive. Now listen, my children, for the story of Amoke did not end with her joining the ancestors. No, his spirit still had more to teach. Before that final journey, there was another chapter, one that blossomed like the hibiscus after a long dry season. For even a weary heart can bloom again when touched by love. It happened one late summer when the air was thick with promise. Amake met Chijioke, a quiet man with laughter that warmed like morning sun. He was from the Igbo lands but had lived many years abroad, walking the same path of longing and loneliness that Amake once knew. When they met, it was as if two rivers had found each other after wandering far through the forest. Chijioke did not speak many words at first, but when he did, his words carried truth. He told her, "A bird cannot fly with one wing. I have flown alone for too long." Amake smiled, and for the first time in many years, she felt seen, not for what she had achieved, but for who she was beneath it all. A woman of spirit, of strength, and song. Their love grew like yam vines, quietly, steadily, wrapping around patience and care. They cooked together, laughed together, and shared stories of their homelands. In their small apartment, they created a rhythm of home. He called her my heart of Benin, and she called him my anchor. Together, they became each other's safe place in the cold land. Soon, they were blessed with children, a boy and a girl. Amoke named them Ehijato and Osato, meaning the one who leads with honor, and from God. From the moment they were born, Amoke taught them songs in her language, stories of the moonlight dances, and proverbs that had shaped her life. Her home became a small Benin village, full of laughter, discipline, and deep respect. Every weekend, she would gather her children around the fire of her kitchen and say, "Listen, my children, you may grow in this land, but never forget where your spirit was planted. A tree without roots cannot bear fruit." She taught them to greet elders with respect, to share their food, to be humble even in abundance. But deep in her heart, the ache of distance never fully left. She loved her husband. She adored her children. Yet there were moments, quiet, still moments, when she longed for the rhythm of her mother's laughter, the scent of harmattan dust, the echo of talking drums at dusk. Even surrounded by love, she sometimes felt that familiar emptiness, that whisper of something missing. One evening, as she tucked her children into bed, Ehegata asked, "Mama, why do you always tell us about your home in Benin? Isn't this our home?" Amoke smiled softly and said, "Yes, my child, this is your home in body. But in spirit, you have two homes, one where you live and one where you are remembered." Her husband watched her that night, understanding the look in her eyes, that tender sorrow that only those who have crossed oceans can know. He took her hand and said, "Home lives inside you, Amoke. You've built one here." She nodded but whispered, "Yes, but the rhythm of home is like heartbeat. It beats stronger where it first began." In time, their house became a meeting place again, filled with laughter, stories, and people from all walks of life. Africans, Caribbeans, even those with no ties to her culture, came to sit at her table. They called her Mama Amoki still, and her husband, Papa Chijioke. Together, they created what many called the second village. Yet, as fulfilling as it was, Amoke never tried to replace what she had left behind. She knew now that each community, the one you are born into and the one you build, holds its own rhythm, its own song. One cannot replace the other. They only add verses to the same melody of life. Sometimes on quiet Sundays, she would make a pot of egusi soup and sit with her family, telling them of the market women, the red soil, and the moonlight gatherings of Urumi. Her children would laugh and ask, "Mama, will you take us there?" She would smile and say, "Yes, my darlings. When the time is right, you will walk the land that sings your name." Years later, when her children were grown, Amoke and Chijoke traveled to Benin together. Her heart leapt like a drum as the airplane descended over the green fields. She stepped out and kissed the ground, whispering, "I am home again." Her mother was gone by then, her father too, but their spirits danced in the breeze that greeted her. Her children ran through the village streets, laughing with cousins they had never met, eating roasted plantain and playing under the great Iroko tree planted in her memory. Amoke stood watching, her eyes wet with both joy and longing. She realized that to her life had come full circle, from loneliness to love, from emptiness to belonging. That evening, as the drums played and people gathered, an elder spoke. Amoke, your journey reminds us that we do not lose our people when we leave them. We carry them within us, like fire hidden in ash. When the right wind comes, it glows again. Amoke bowed her head, her heart swelling with gratitude. Later that night, she told her husband, I have lived between two worlds and both have shaped me. My family here gives me joy, but my roots there give me meaning. It is only now that I understand. Every person we meet adds a verse to our life's song, but only our people teach us the rhythm. Chijioke nodded, holding a hand beneath the starlit sky. Then our children will know both, he said. They will dance to the rhythm of home and sing the song of the world. And Amoke smiled, for that was all she ever wanted. For her children to know that love is wide, but roots are deep. When they returned overseas, the house felt different. Not because it had changed, but because they now carried two worlds in their hearts, one that taught them how to dream, and another that reminded them who they were. Their home became a living bridge between lands, hearts, and generations. And though the years continued to pass, Amoke's wisdom deepened. She often said, each person who walks through your life brings a piece of the puzzle. But the first piece, the one given by your people, is what gives the picture meaning. Her children never forgot those words. And so, my children, as the moon climbs higher and the fire dies low, remember the story of Amoke, the woman who found love, built family, and still understood that the embrace of one's people is a melody no other song can replace. For the arms of love are many, but the arms of home hold you differently. This story teaches us that you may build new homes, new friendships, and new love, but never forget the first rhythm that shaped your heart. For the roots of belonging are eternal, and the song of home never fades.